everyone, and welcome. My name is Sophie Park, and I'll be your host and moderator today. And actually, welcome to our first live event of the year, 2024. It's exciting, and it's a pleasure to have everyone joining us today. And for those of you who's here for the first time, these What If series intends to challenge conventional thinkings and help us imagine new possibilities through groundbreaking innovation in healthcare. And today, actually, we'll ask ourselves, what if we were born 30 years from now? Will today's breakthroughs be tomorrow's standard? We'll discuss how scientific breakthroughs, especially in genetic medicine, could help us tackle some of today's most pressing health challenges, like cancer, monogenic diseases, and we'll explore current efforts and partnerships and collaborations to develop future therapies. We'll discuss what it takes to shape a healthcare landscape that's equitable as well, and that leverages all the exciting opportunity that lies ahead. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce two amazing speakers today. First is Shehnaaz Suliman. She's the CEO and board member of Recode Therapeutics, a clinical stage biotech company developing genetic medicines that's also part of Leaps by Bayer portfolio. Shehnaaz, welcome. It's exciting to have you here.
Great to be here.
And our second speaker is Juergen Eckhardt, our Executive Vice President, Head of Leaps by Bayer, the Impact Investment Unit of Bayer AG, and our Head of Pharmaceuticals, Business Development, Licensing, and Open Innovation. Juergen, it's really great to have you with us.
Thank you, Sophie, and welcome everyone.
Great. So before we get started, I'd like to encourage all of our audience members to continuously engage with us as we're having our conversations. If you have questions, please drop them into the chat and we'll get to them towards the end of our conversation today, I promise. So, all right, let's jump in. Juergen, this first question's for you, actually. So as the head of Leaps by Bayer, you're really at the forefront of tackling some of the world's biggest challenges through, our ambitious Leaps pillars, right? Could you share with us how these Leaps are shaping the future of healthcare today, and maybe even perhaps highlight 2 or 3 sort of breakthrough innovation that you believe will have the most significant impact in the next 30 years?
Well, sure, happy to. Thank you for the question, Sophie. Well, we started Leaps about 8 years ago, right, with the goal of tackling some of humanity's biggest challenges in the areas of healthcare and agriculture. And at the time when we started this, we basically took a white sheet of paper and said, okay, what are those 10 areas that we want to focus on, right? And these are our so-called 10 Leaps. 6 of them are focused on healthcare, 4 of them are focused on agriculture. And if I just, you asked me for the 1 or 2 or 3 biggest areas of impact that we see. If I start with our Leaps number 1, which is basically cure genetic disease. And I think we have seen a tremendous amount of progress over the last 10 years in just this one Leap by itself. If I may just point to one of the most recent approvals, today we can cure sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia, 2 genetic diseases, where today we can basically change this mutated gene, put in the correct gene that basically cures these patients, right? I think 10 years ago, a lot of that was still sort of fiction, right? And today it's a reality. But we've only scratched the surface in terms of genetic disease, right? There are thousands of other genetic diseases where we are not yet able to cure them. Delivery is one of the issues that we are having, and I'm sure Shehnaaz can talk more about that later. But I see much more progress to be had in terms of curing genetic disease over the next 10, 20, 30 years. Second one I would like to call out is it's basically regenerate tissue, right? A lot of chronic diseases today are characterized by permanent loss of cell function or tissue function, right? If you think of a patient who has had a myocardial infarct, he has scar tissue in his heart muscle, and that heart muscle is with all the therapies today, is not gonna restore to full functionality as before the incident, right? So if we are able to regenerate that scar tissue with beating heart muscle cells, right, we would have a real cure. So that is where cell therapy comes in, and that is just one of those chronic diseases. There are many others, and we can talk about others later on. But that's another area where I think we will see major breakthroughs, right, with cell therapy to basically replace lost tissue and cell function in human bodies, and therefore hopefully restore a healthy state. Maybe I stop here and we continue later on to dive deeper.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Juergen. And so Shehnaaz, to kind of go, with to connect the dots with what, Juergen's already have said, with your leadership at Recode Therapeutics, you're also driving a lot of this, breakthrough innovation that could help, more people benefit from genetic medicine, right? I mean, could you tell us a little bit more about the work that your company is doing and how you actually envision it, tangibly sort of contributing to the landscape of the future of healthcare?
Absolutely delighted to do that. We are a genetic medicine company focused on pioneering the next wave of genetic medicines, and we are doing so specifically by focusing on the delivery part of this, and I'll explain what that means in just a moment. I would say, taking a step back, the world is most familiar with genetic medicines, of course, in the context of the COVID vaccine, which contains an mRNA encapsulated in a carrier, a lipid nanoparticle carrier. And that carrier is what enables the mRNA to be taken up into cells and to do its important work of making the protein, or creating the immune response in the case of the vaccine. Our goal is to go beyond what vaccines have done and beyond the liver, because many of the metabolites are then ultimately trafficked to the liver. And the goal is really to, spread wide open the potential for genetic medicines by enabling different kinds of genetic cargoes, not just mRNA, but gene editors, for example, that can replace or restore proteins that are defective in genetic diseases because of the underlying problem that is caused by the gene defect. So we're working to develop novel, mRNA-based and gene correction medicines that work to treat diseases like orphan respiratory diseases like cystic fibrosis, and a lesser-known disease called primary ciliary dyskinesia. And our goal at the end of the day is to do what you alluded to, which is to develop genetic medicines that are first and foremost truly targeted and go directly to the part of the body, like the lungs in this instance, that require treatment, and also to go to cells that are directly relevant. So this idea of being able to target things like basal cells or progenitor cells or stem cells, the cells that then give rise to the next generation cells that become that are perhaps defective in the disease, allows you to do treatment once or very infrequently to enable this carry-on effect of the treatment to propagate as a result of the gene editing or the protein replacement that has been done. So this is really the holy grail for personalized medicine or targeted precision genetic medicine, which we're trying to fulfill the promise of.
Thanks. And then just to sort of follow up with that, right? I mean, I know you've both mentioned that we're just scratching the surface of what, genetic medicine and therapies are. And you also sort of took us through the delivery, right? And how Recode is actually, addressing the huge challenge that is of delivery of these, groundbreaking therapies. And what we also know is that there's over 10,000, monogenic human diseases, right? And that means that 1 in every 50 people is affected by a single gene disorder, of which some are life-threatening and others can obviously cause some severe problems and, ultimately reduce quality of life. And I know you sort of went through about the mRNA, and the COVID vaccine was a really good example of that. But how likely do you think that in the 30 years that we're able to sort of prevent chronic suffering, and maybe even find a cure, right? As Juergen mentioned, that we do have a cure now for sickle cell, and by stopping genetic diseases before they even progress further. Like, how likely is that, you think? And this is also for Shehnaaz.
Got it. Thank you. So I think it's reasonably likely because it's helpful to just take a step back and think about the differences between, for example, gene therapy, which was the first wave of genetic medicine, and where we are right now. With gene therapy, this involves the introduction of functional genes directly into a patient's cells using a viral carrier. And we've been reasonably successful with 8 or 9 approvals in the gene therapy space for diseases of the eye, spinal muscular atrophy, with Luxturna, a number of other very rare, I would say, monogenic diseases that have fatal consequences. With genetic medicine, the potential is much broader than just gene therapy, because here we're really talking about the delivery of a wide variety of genetic cargoes, as I mentioned, such as mRNA, gene editors, such as CRISPR, which are probably more well known to people, that directly affect genetic sequences, potentially offering higher precision and specificity. And these can be encapsulated, as I said, in both viral vectors as well as non-viral vectors like the lipid nanoparticles that we're working on. And so it's really, I think it's been a step change to be able to look at both the carrier side of the equation and the cargo side of the equation, optimizing these both. Remember that mRNA was discovered in the 60s and lipid nanoparticles in the 70s. So it really took us several decades to understand how mRNA works and then optimize it sufficiently to be able to result in a therapeutic. And one could argue that COVID provided the world with a catalyst to be able to really find the best use case to make this possible. And it took lots and lots of innovations, in the form of RNA, and we now have siRNA, tRNA, mRNA. So I would say we're at the beginning of an inflection curve where we are able to combine both the cargo of innovation and the delivery innovation, and that is going to be the substrate that enables us to make great progress. And so I'm very excited about where we will go with this. But I will say we're sort of at the beginning of a technology and innovation inflection point.
Well, still an exciting beginning, I'd say. But that's really interesting to hear, right? I don't know, many of you know that, mRNA and this technology was actually founded in the 60s and 70s. So thanks for sharing that. And for you, Juergen, so majority of rare diseases, right, are linked to genetics and often lack effective treatments like what we've been discussing before. But to what extent could, today's genetic medicine breakthrough sort of shift the prognosis of transforming rare diseases from untreatable to manageable? And I know that, Shehnaaz sort of went there and said, we're right at that inflection point, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, first of all, I fully agree with Shehnaaz. I also think we are at an inflection point, although I should also say, things in our industry don't happen overnight, as the example of mRNA discovery and LNP discovery, a few decades later, so it takes time in our industry, right? So I don't want patients to have unrealistic expectations on how soon this will come. We've seen, as we've mentioned, the examples that Shehnaaz or I gave earlier, some patients suffering from certain diseases who really do have therapies available today who really goes from untreatable to manageable or even cure, right? And that is fantastic, right? But we need more work. We need more partnering across the industry. Maybe that's another important point that we should discuss, that nobody can do this alone, right? You need so many different capabilities, technologies that need to come together to unleash the potential of it all, to provide these solutions to patients. If I may just maybe name a few of the programs that we today have in our pipeline at Bayer, and actually all came through partnerships, right? So we acquired a company called AskBio a few years back, one of the leaders in gene therapy. And we have today several clinical stage programs, just to mention 2. One is a gene therapy for Parkinson's disease, which is about to go into phase 2. And the other one is in the area of chronic heart failure, right? So This is in clinical development, still more data needed until and more time needed until this hopefully will become an approved therapy. But there is great hope, that we will make significant progress here with such therapies. Another company which actually started as a Leaps portfolio company, a company we co-created at the time in 2016, is Blue Rock. And they are focused on stem cell therapy, on the induced pluripotent stem cell. They too have a therapy that is going into phase 2 in the near future, again to treat Parkinson's patients. It would be a replacement of these dopaminergic neurons that have decayed in Parkinson's patients and that don't produce enough dopamine anymore, with new effective neurons that would basically restore that dopamine level that we need to basically get rid of Parkinson's. Just to call out those two companies and those programs. So I think there is great hope and a high expectation that for many more diseases, these new technologies will provide solutions to patients in the foreseeable future.
And so,
Thanks,
if I may, I'm glad you mentioned other diseases. I just wanted to also highlight that the goal is to go beyond rare diseases, and our hope is that we will be able to target other diseases. So, in the case of our strategy, we're starting with 2 rare orphan diseases: primary ciliary dyskinesia and CF. Cystic fibrosis, and in one case we target the cilia cells that are have a gene defect that affect the mucociliary escalator. In the other case, we're replacing a protein, so it's an mRNA replacement protein strategy for cystic fibrosis. But the goal is that once we've done that, we'll be able to target other diseases of the lung, such as chronic airways diseases, like non-CF bronchiectasis. Bronchiectasis is a final common pathway for a lot of lung diseases, and if you've shown that you can affect the underlying mucociliary clearance, then it's a question of finding the right target biology to treat with either mRNA or gene editing approach. And similarly, if we're able to find a method to deliver genetic cargo to the brain, whether that's through the CNS, through the CSF, through intrathecal delivery directly, then we can target certain cell types like microglia, for example, which are on critical path for a wide variety of neurodegenerative diseases, and perhaps introduce a gene correction or gene editing construct into the microglia cells directly in order to affect the natural history of a neurodegenerative diseases, and similarly an intramuscular upload for musculoskeletal disorders. So I think these applications are not just in rare diseases, but the way that we build 2 bigger indications is through understanding how best to access the right cells in the right tissue in the right way. And that's really the hope.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And if I may jump in here too, I hope that's okay, Sophie.
Absolutely, Juergen.
Great example, Shehnaaz. And what I think we forgot to mention so far, I mentioned partnering briefly, right? But we have a great partnership between AskBio and Recode, right? AskBio, as I said, sort of one of the leaders in gene therapy. They have the cargo, but where Recode comes in is your sort of unique approach to delivery. We briefly touched upon delivery being sort of one of the bottlenecks, right? You can have the best cargo, but if you can't deliver it to the site where you need it to be, right, to work exactly where you need it to be and nowhere else, that is one of the missing links, to address many diseases today. And I think that's where Recode comes in and where this partnership comes in. Maybe Shehnaaz, you want to talk a little bit more about sort of the uniqueness of your delivery technology, which is fantastic.
Of course. And I would say, we cannot say enough good things about our partnership with AskBio and M.B.A, because it's a great example, not just of bringing together 2 technologies that require each other to make a therapeutic successfully. So, the AskBio team brings kind of the DNA expertise, and we bring the delivery expertise to enable this to go to the lung or liver. And we're looking at a novel genome editing approach for a wide variety of disease applications that affect the liver and lung. Sickle cell disease could be an example. Alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency could be another. But it's really a combination of bringing the strengths of each company in terms of biology expertise on the cargo and delivery side. The reason we're excited about what we can do is we take a traditional 4-component LNP, like the one in the COVID vaccines, which traditionally has just trafficked to the liver and gotten basically metabolized there. But we add a 5th and a 6th lipid, and we make combinatorial possibilities with different biochemical constructs. And the addition of that 5th or 6th lipid acts as a beacon or a guide or the GPS, if you like, of directing how these lipids will go to different organs and tissues and cell types. And the ability to do that with precision and specificity is actually a massive advantage, because it then allows you to get, as I said, directly into a disease-relevant cell, which, when combined with the right genetic cargo, to do its work in the construct of interest. And this is so important because some of the challenges with viral delivery has been, immunogenicity, this idea that the introduction of a viral vector causes your own body to mount an immune response, and that then creates antibodies, which diminishes the effect of the genetic medicine that you're trying to deliver. It also creates problems for redosing, and there's some other manufacturing constraints. So this idea that we can optimize delivery through an elegant mechanism that allows for the kind of tissue specificity and sensitivity that we're trying to drive for is, a step change for the field of genetic medicine.
Thank you so much, both, and for going through sort of your partnership. But at the same time, Juergen, I also wanted to ask you, because Recode just didn't show up out of nowhere, right? Like it's one of the Leap's portfolio companies, and I'm sure we have a lot of biotech companies who are listening in, founders and also even early stage biotech companies now, and even investors. So there are huge breakthroughs that I'm hearing also coming out from Recode and what we're working on together with them. But this is more of a question for you in terms of the investments and sort of the funding decisions, right? Because at the end of the day, right, these innovations need funding, and it needs funding in order to turn and catalyze that idea into reality. And so could you also take us, briefly behind the scenes on how your team sort of evaluates these sort of innovations and places its bets on, genetic medicine and beyond?
Sure, that's a great question. Look, I mean, first of all, as I mentioned initially, we have our 10 leaps, which is sort of our strategic focus areas, right? So when we see something new, the first question is this a fit to our investment strategy? Does it fit into one of our 10 leaps? And then within each of those 10 leaps, we have sort of certain hypotheses, certain areas of interest of ours. We talked delivery, realizing that one of the leaps is sort of genetic medicines. And we realized delivery is really a big missing link, right? So we are looking at all sort of delivery type, or we have been looking at all types of delivery technologies out there, studying academic papers, go to conferences, meet entrepreneurs, right? Scan the landscape, basically, right? And then if we see something that we think is really differentiated and can do the trick, right, for many patients to basically unleash the potential of these therapies and make them really available and effective, then we start to dig in, right? And then we do our due diligence, right? Where you sort of check all the science and the data and the patents and the team and everything else that you need to check before you get comfortable with making an investment. So it's a lengthy process, it doesn't happen overnight. It's usually sort of a 3 to 6 month process, right? Before you are finally executing a new investment. But it all starts with a fit to sort of our investment strategy. And sometimes we have to say no, not because we think it's a bad idea what is being pursued, but you sort of need to focus on your areas of expertise. And where also you can contribute something.
Yeah, Sophie, if I may just add, a moment of gratitude for the work that Juergen and his team does, because without that fundamental lifeblood of investment, it actually is really, really hard to make solid progress. And I think the other thing I've really appreciated about the LEAPS team is that when you decide to invest, you do so at a substantive level. And I feel that it's underappreciated how important it is to have critical mass in an investment thesis around genetic medicine, because it is expensive to make the cargo, the delivery component, formulated appropriately in the right way, and scale it up in a way that enables us to test it in animals and patients ultimately. That while not a complicated manufacturing process, each of those components are very specialized, and there aren't many people in the world that do this. So this whole idea of being able to, make the therapeutic and the infrastructure required actually requires quite a lot of funding and investment. And we were so happy when Juerg and the team came in the last round in a way that really anchored the company and allowed us to build the infrastructure to scale appropriately to make these medicines available. And I think the broader point is we need the entire biotech ecosystem to be functioning in order for us to advance therapeutic innovations for patients successfully. We need venture capital at the beginning. We need academic collaborations with the right scientific advisors. We need partnerships with companies, to enable us to make faster progress through technology synergies. Ultimately, we need the public markets to play ball so that these companies can, continue to advance and build and scale and grow and raise the capital needed to effectively, because once you get into patients, we're so excited about the fact that we're dosing patients, PCD patients who have had no treatments forever. I mean, I get LinkedIn messages almost every month from a parent who has had a child get the devastating diagnosis, and there is zero treatment available. But at the same time, the entrepreneur in me is very anxious about the fact that we're in the clinic because it's expensive. And even if I wanted to take another program into the clinic right now, I'm not sure we could afford to do it. So, these are the push-pull dynamics that we face. And that's why I'm very grateful to have a partnership with Juergen and his team, who not only provide financial resources, but a really, I think, deep understanding of what it takes to build and scale and grow appropriately so that we're able to advance these innovative therapies to patients in the appropriate way.
I like that, scaling appropriately. And I think everything that you both have said until now, right? Obviously, there's the business side to it. You have to scale appropriately. You need to get the right funding. You got to get the right backers behind you. The technology needs to be right to ultimately impact an equitable future for patients, right? And, again, Shehnaaz, I want to sort of go back to you. And, based on your experience, I know you just mentioned you get, LinkedIn messages all the time from these patients who are unable to get access to, certain therapies. But, in your experience in sort of broadening this access, right, to innovation treatments, what strategies do you think are ultimately important to make sure that, these new medical breakthroughs, right, sort of reach everyone to help, again, reduce a lot of health inequalities? What do you think?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I believe that everyone deserves access to healthcare innovation and any treatments that will improve their healthcare outcomes. And I think we can do a lot more to enable that. And this starts with, first and foremost, designing clinical trials that represent fully the underlying patient population. And that includes things like, race, gender, age, geographic representation to ensure that. A big part of the problem in rare disease is that these patients are, essentially deflated because they think that there isn't a therapeutic, not enough therapies are being developed. Also, there have been a lot of false hopes for certain rare diseases. And so patients are, while motivated to try something, have also, I think, suffered from, setbacks. And so developing awareness about the diagnosis, the education around the potential risk benefit of new treatments, and ensuring that patients and that the community understands that, hope is not lost because they haven't been a big focus of research efforts in the past in the rare disease space. And then finally, when a new treatment is approved, it's about ensuring that patients know how to navigate the healthcare system and pay a reimbursement to be able to access the treatment. I honestly believe we'll succeed when medicines are developed for as broad a patient population as possible. And there are some very creative strategies that I've used in the past in the context of infectious diseases, et cetera, to kind of bridge the gap between those who have access to treatment and those who don't. But I would say the bottom line is we have to start thinking about this from the moment we dose our first patient.
Okay. No, I mean, that's really powerful. I don't know, a lot of, biotech founders actually think that way. Hopefully they do, but, thank you for also sharing that. And, part of this is also, I know you briefly mentioned earlier, right? It's now sort of jumping back to this business side. It's not necessarily only about, the money's important, the right investors are important, the technology is also important, and, the right scaling is also important. But again, you also touched on the policy aspect, right? How can healthcare policy sort of evolve? Like, what do you think is needed in order to sort of address the gaps between, countries with abundant resources and those with limited access, right? Because a lot of the therapies that we see, they're really coming from, innovation powerhouses where countries can actually, afford them, right? So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think we have to go in with a clear-eyed view of the cost of these genetic medicine therapies. If you look at the cost of gene therapies, and if you look at the cost of, thankfully, the cost of our vaccines was de minimis because we were able to drive scale and broad scale access. But I think we have to be creative about both the business models and the funding strategies, particularly if we're thinking about access in the developing world. The blueprint for how to do this well has been demonstrated. I did this in infectious diseases with HIV, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C, where effectively, when I was at Gilead, we provided the tech transfer to Indian generic companies to make a generic version of our life-saving HIV treatments for the developing world, which was only accessible in developing world markets. And of course, if we saw any of that encroach on our commercial markets, we would revoke those agreements. So I think there is a way to bifurcate our pricing strategy around these medicines. There is a way to kind of help drive scale eventually around them with interesting business partners. And then I do think that we have to think about the role of government to also step up and create subsidies, both in this country as well as in other countries. That idea of creating funding strategies to subsidize the cost of genetic medicines, particularly for broad scale applications, is going to be an important component of this.
Hopefully we get there soon, huh? And so thank you so much to both of you. And Juergen, before I go to you and sort of, to wind down the session, I also want to remind the audience members that, you can still put in your questions in the chat and we'll get to it very shortly. But Juergen, to you, right? So I'm thinking kind of envisioning healthcare in 2050, roughly about 30 years from now. You mentioned the 10 pillars of LEAPS, right? And I'm sure you've seen hundreds of thousands of companies, but I'm really curious to know, right? What types of care and treatment do you think could actually be the standard in 30 years that may seem somewhat of a science fiction today?
Yeah, let me give you two answers. I first come with a more general answer tied to sort of the access and cost perspective, and then maybe a little bit with science fiction. But I think healthcare in 2050 will be much more personalized, individualized, and earlier detection and prevention, right? Because we will have much more individual data on individuals' biology, right? Which will allow you to detect things, disease processes. Arteriosclerosis is like a decade-long process, right? Cancer development is also probably a multi-year-long process, right? Until you have a real tumor, right? And if our insights into our own biology grow, I think we should be able to intervene much earlier, which will also allow us to hopefully get costs down, right? And you know, I'm a strong believer in what you can measure, you start to manage, right? We all know that, you know, you should get 10,000 steps and don't smoke and don't, you know, whatever, all these other recommendations, right? But
Yeah.
unless you sort of see your own biology and what impact these things may have on your own biology, I think you tend to think, well, maybe not me, not today, right? Maybe others, but I will not get hurt, right? So I think this whole data aspect, we haven't really talked about it today, but we are generating so much more data through biology, and if we make that data on an individual level in an actionable way available to individuals, I think they will act more responsibly and hopefully be able to detect wrong disease developments way earlier than today. And then in terms of science fiction, you know, we've been, and I'm just mentioning xenotransplantation, right? We've invested in one company, Genesis, that is doing that. That is basically growing pig organs, right, to replace diseased organs in humans. They humanize these organs in a way that they don't get rejected by the human body. And not Genesis, but another company, I think they have already implanted 2 of those hearts into patients, which have performed much better than originally expected or than historically seen, right, with these gene edits that have sort of humanized these organs. So I see a world where not just for heart, but also extracorporeal liver perfusion, things like that, where you can use xenotransplantation, animal organs to sort of replace human organ functions for humans who have lost sort of an organ. So that's a little bit of science fiction, but hopefully something that will benefit patients in 20 or 30 years, or maybe even earlier.
Oh, you're right. I mean, yeah. I mean, science fiction, however, it's happening now, right? So who knows? In 30 years, it could really be a reality. And thanks, Juergen, for sharing. And for you, Shehnaaz, also, you know, a similar question, right? I mean, what do you sort of think about this, you know, from a perspective of in 30 years by 2050, you know, what do you sort of envision with the technologies that you're developing and you're working with? And also to sort of add on to that, right? How do we actually ensure that we're building the future of healthcare that sort of embraces all of these opportunities ahead?
Yeah, so I would say at a local level, I'm hoping that targeted precision genetic medicines, where we have the right genetic cargo with the appropriate delivery mechanism for the appropriate indication, you know, whether that's an inhaled treatment for the lung, an intramuscular treatment for muscular disease, IV for systemic medicine, I'm hoping that can become more of a reality for patients. I think the other component of this that I find exciting is the role that AI will play in medicine. I think it's multifaceted and it continues to evolve very rapidly, whether that's in, you know, improving diagnostic accuracy or treatment outcomes or personalizing patient care through telemedicine and, you know, increasing operational efficiency. And then just in drug discovery and development, you know, the ability to accelerate drug discovery and development by, you know, enabling the analysis of large amounts of biologic data to, you know, to identify potential, you know, discovery of drug candidates that would predict their efficacy, to optimize the way that, you know, these should be tweaked. You know, I think this is all going to be important. And specifically at Recode, the way we use AI is we're developing, you know, an AI model that can enable us to take all this empirical data we know about how these lipid nanoparticles can traffic to different tissues and cell types and put that into our machine learning model in order for us to be able to really ultimately just punch in a formula for which LNP we need to go to which target tissue or cell type. And that would be a step change in terms of our discovery throughput to be able to do that, with a vast array of combinatorial possibilities honed into the exact use case that we want this to work for. So I think AI is going to revolutionize the way medicine is practiced in many different aspects of it. And I think that for us in the innovation space, the specific application of AI to different parts of the discovery and development value chain will also be extremely important.
No, absolutely. And also, Juergen, to just sort of round this out, I want to ask you the same question as well, right? How do you believe that, what do you think we should be doing to ensure that we're actually building a healthcare future, right? That embraces, every important aspect and opportunity ahead?
That's a very broad question, Sophie.
It is.
Can you frame that a little bit more for me?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, as Shehnaaz has mentioned, right, like technology is evolving, right? And, she also mentioned AI, right? That could potentially be a larger opportunity as well. Is it collaborations and partnerships, right, that we need to embrace? Is it more on the policy side that we need to embrace? Is it more specific technologies, right, that we need to embrace, or is it all, right? What do you think?
Yeah, look, so I think technologies will be a big contributor, right, to making a better healthcare system and to improve patient health, right? And it does require partnering. That's one of our strong beliefs here, my personal belief, but also our belief at Bayer and at Leaps, right? There's so much insights being generated in biology, in chemistry, in AI, and at the confluence of all of this, I think you can unleash all these new therapies that we need to get to a better healthcare. And we also touched upon the other aspect, cost, I think, and access. It's critical, right? This should not be sort of a healthcare just for the rich countries, right? But with scale, we will be able to get the cost down and make it available to the broader population. And also with what I mentioned earlier, I think with early detection, with prevention, with insights into personal biology, we should be able to be much more earlier and with much more cost effective, but of course with much less suffering for individuals, right? Because these diseases hopefully will not develop into sort of a full-fledged disease state, with all the suffering for patients. So that's sort of my vision for the healthcare of the future, right? Healthcare is expensive, right? Disease is even more expensive, but I think with these developments that we've been talking about today, I see a future where healthcare cost as a percentage of global GDP should hopefully be able to come down over the next few decades.
Great. I mean, thank you both. I mean, this is really insightful, and I hope you as audience members also found it the same. I know there's a few Q&A or questions that are coming in, so I want to actually jump right into the Q&A section now. And there's a few that came in, but for those of you who still are on the edge and would like to ask a question, feel free to do so, because we'll still be here for a couple of minutes. But the first question, Juergen, is for you. How do you see cost effectiveness of genetic medicine to reach broader community in days to come, in days or years to come, I guess? Are LNPs the only drug delivery system available for genetic medicines? So it's more of like a two-in-one question for you, Juergen.
Yeah, so I feel the second question probably, Shehnaaz, you should
Maybe Shehnaaz can answer that. Yeah.
The first one, how to bring the cost down of gene therapies. Yeah, that's. I think it will come down, as we talked about earlier, in terms of getting scale into this to make these technologies cheaper. But they are super expensive today, and I'm fully aware of that. And But we have to find ways to bring these costs down and to also maybe come up with creative reimbursement models so that they become more affordable for patients around the world. So I see this as a big issue, and I'm afraid I don't have an easy answer to that in the short term, right?
Yeah. And maybe for you, Shehnaaz, the second, our LNP is the only drug delivery system, available for genetic medicines currently.
No, I mean, so we think about the world of delivery in terms of viral and non-viral approaches, and there are several non-viral delivery methods that have been developed. I think LNPs are the most clinically matured because they're the ones that have been in billions of administered COVID vaccines, and so these lipid-based delivery systems are, and because of the obvious advantages they are versatile carriers for different kinds of genetic cargoes like RNA, DNA, and genetic, gene editing constructs, and we think the great hope is that they'd have less immunogenicity, are scalable, can be redosed, and so the packaging versatility is which makes them interesting. There are other non-viral approaches. There are, there's sort of cell-based approaches. There's the ability to use, other endosomal methods. There's the ability to conjugate different proteins onto viral carriers or to LNPs, active and passive delivery methods. But because they've all been in billions of doses of COVID vaccines, we think it's a useful place to start. And our goal, of course, is to take all that innovation we learned through vaccine delivery and liver-based delivery, and to go beyond the liver with extrahepatic delivery to many different organs and tissue types.
Got it. No, thank you. Thank you for those insights. Maybe again, to sort of follow up there, right? Can you further elaborate? This is from Elnaz to Shehnaaz. Can you further elaborate on manufacturing capacities and partnerships to mass manufacture the therapies of the future?
Certainly. I think the great advantage of manufacturing billions of doses is that there is a fair amount of capacity now. And we found that even pharmaceutical companies that have built and scaled to create LNP manufacturing redundancies now have excess capacity available that can be leveraged by companies such as ours. So in fact, some of our backup manufacturing comes from arrangements and collaborations with both pharmaceutical companies as well as traditional CDMOs, manufacturing partners that actually do this, as their kind of bread and butter business. So I don't foresee any issues with the supply chain at this point. I think that capacity exists. The issue is getting the innovation to catch up with this, to for not just rare diseases, but also for going beyond rare diseases, so we can make genetic medicines a reality for a broader set of patients.
No, thank you. And this question actually is for both of you. And Juergen, I'd love for you to take it first, and maybe we shape it this way, right? The question is, what is the speaker's opinion about AI impact to R&D timelines and probability of success rates of investigational new drugs? And so, maybe Juergen, if you can also speak on behalf of LEAPS as well, right? Because I know you mentioned you're also looking at, making these investments, and everyone wants to hear from LEAPS, right? The guy who's leading it from an investor's perspective, and also Shehnaaz, next you as well in terms of more tangible access and delivery. So Juergen, would you like to start?
Sure. So, I mean, AI machine learning is a big topic, right, in our industry. Shehnaaz talked about it earlier. It will definitely speed up our drug discovery timelines, and it will also increase our probabilities of success. Many things that we needed to do sort of in a wet lab, right, with lengthy timelines, we can now do much faster and quicker. And build, we understand these protein structures on a much more detailed level today. We can investigate ligand protein interactions at a much more detailed way, and we can build hypotheses much more quicker with machine learning and AI. So we'll have a huge impact, and we'll revolutionize the way we do discover and also develop drugs. We are applying some of that in-house, of course, and also some of our Leaps portfolio companies are among the leaders in this field. So yeah, it's a big and important technology.
Yeah, if you'd like me to comment, I would say, the two areas on the front end are around target identification and validation. So analyzing large-scale biological data sets, and, this includes genomics and proteomics data, and, integrating that to predict where you can have better protein interactions, to optimize candidates for investigation. And then in the drug design and optimization, I mean, there's a big field around computational methods such as, machine learning and deep learning algorithms to then drive the design and optimization of these novel drug candidates even better. And then, I think at the front end of it, it's really more around biomarker data, patient stratification, and optimizing clinical trials so that you can, enhance, you can optimize patient recruitment and stratification, and, in a way, predict trial outcomes better and surrogate endpoints that we couldn't do before. So this potential to, revolutionize, I think, both the front end of drug discovery by accelerating the target discovery and optimization, and the back end through better predictive modeling of patient outcomes is going to be an important component. But again, we're just at the beginning of trying to figure that out. I think it will enhance the overall probability of technical success. By far, how much is an open question.
I think that's fair. And I think that's a great place to sort of end this. I love that. It's like the future is here, but we're not quite there yet. And so, this is why we have people like you, Juergen and Shehnaaz, helping us guide the way. And I want to sort of thank you both actually for joining us for this session. So thank you. And last but not least, I want to thank the audience members for keeping up with us. It was a quite lively discussion today, and honestly, your engagement and also the questions added quite a bit of value to our discussion as well. So it's a privilege to be hosting you all today, and I hope you leave today with new insights and inspiration on what potentially healthcare can look like. I mean, these are not just innovations that are technically science fiction. These are actually happening today. So we'll see what it looks like in 2050. So for those of you joining us, today was our very first What If session of the year, and we are planning on hosting more events like this in the coming months. So please keep an eye out on the Bayer Pharmaceuticals LinkedIn page for more updates. Thank you to you both, Shehnaaz, Juergen, again, and to the audience members, and everyone. Have a wonderful week, and see you all soon.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.